going to learn how to add and subtract fractions. How can you add and subtract fractions? Look at the following. Can you add and subtract these fractions? Why or why not? The answer for this would be yes, because you have a common denominator. The denominator for all three fractions is 3. Therefore, we would add the numerators, so 1 plus 4 plus 2 gives me 7, and the denominator would stay the same. Then you would also want to simplify this, and this would actually equal 2 1/3. We've already learned how to do that. Is subtraction any different? The answer is no. As long as you have a common denominator, you just subtract the numerators, and the denominator stays the same. Again, you can simplify this by dividing them both by 3 to find out that your answer is actually 1/3. So now let's look at some. 1/5 plus 2/5. Remember, we have a common denominator, so we just add the numerators and leave the denominator the same. 5/7 minus 2/7. Common denominator, subtract the numerators and leave the denominator the same. 1/2 plus 1/2. Well, 1 plus 1 is 2. Denominator stays the same. Well, 2/2 actually equals 1 whole, because I can divide 2 by 2, which equals 1. Let's look at the next one. 1/3 plus what equals 1? We know that the 1 has to be 3/3. That equals 1. So how many 3's do I have to add to 1? 2/3. What plus 2/6 will give me 1? Again, the 1, if I change it to a fraction, is 6/6. So 2 plus what gives me 6? That would be 4/6. 5/8 plus what equals 1? Again, getting to 8/8. If you need to change it, go ahead. You would add 3/8. Subtraction is no different. The 1 is still equal to the numerator and the denominator being the same, so 3/3. Then you just subtract the numerators. 3 minus 1 is 2, and the denominator stays the same. 1 minus 3/8. Again, change that whole number to a fraction of 8/8. Remember, your fraction has to be the same as your denominator. 8 minus 3 is 5, and 8 stays the same. 1 minus 1/6, change it to 6/6, and you find out that 6 minus 1 is 5, so you end up with 5/6. Now let's fill in a little bit more of our notes. How to add and subtract fractions with the same denominator? Well, if you have the same denominator, all you're doing is adding or subtracting the numerator. Remember, the numerator is the top number. How to find a fraction that adds another fraction with the same denominator to produce 1? Well, the numerators have to add up to what the denominator is. So you could write down numerator have to equal denominator. That's like our examples above, where we did 1/3 plus 2/3 equals 3/3, or a whole. That's because we had a 3/3. So just make sure that when you're trying to get to a whole, you do have the same numerator and denominator. The next one is, how do you subtract a fraction from 1? Change the 1 to a fraction. And make sure that the fraction has to do with the denominator. It has the same denominator. Remember, we have to have the same value, even though we're just changing it from a whole number to a fraction. Fractions show part of a whole. We've already learned that. It's the part over the whole. So 1/2 is half of something. Not all of it, but half of something. The top number is the numerator. That number, the top number is a fraction, shows how many parts I'm dividing something up into. How many parts, what am I going to share? How many pieces are people going to get? And the denominator is the bottom number of the fraction. That shows how many equal parts the item was divided into. That's how many parts the whole has. Now, we have our foldable. Again, if you were in class to get your foldable, you can write these in your yellow book and just transfer them when you get there. So some of the things for adding, and if you want to write adding above your example, you can. Adding a fraction with unlike denominators. Now, in this case, they don't have the same denominators. We need to make sure that we get the same denominators in order to add them. First, you must find a common denominator. So if I'm going to find a common denominator, I have to multiply the top and the bottom by the same thing, or I'm finding the LCM. The easiest way to do it is just multiply the denominators together. So 1/3 plus 5, 6. Well, 3 times 6 gives me 18. So I need to find something over 18 plus something over 18. Well, ask yourself, what did you do to 3 to get to 18? Well, I multiplied that by 6. I have to do the same thing to the top number. So 1 times 6 is 6. Again, ask yourself, what did you do to 6 to get to 18? I multiplied by 3. I have to also multiply the top number. So I'm going to do 5 times 3 to get 15. Now that I've been able to change them, I've changed them by multiplying the denominator and the numerator by the same number. I can then add the numerators. So let's go ahead and add. 6 plus 15 gives me 21. Keep the denominator. So we want to keep the denominator, which still says 18 now, because that's what we have. And then the last step is to simplify if possible. Well, how many groups of 18 can you take out of 21? I can take one group of 18, and I have 3 out of 18 left over. But then I still have to ask myself, can I simplify that fraction? I can. I can divide them both by 3, find out that this is 1 and 1/6. Make sure you've written down this example and have it to refer to later. We have an example here for subtraction as well. Same thing applies. Must have a common denominator. Well, how do I get a common denominator? I change the numerator and the denominator by multiplying. Well, 3 times 8 is 24. So I'm going to have that be my common denominator. I can always find my LCM, but the easiest way is just to multiply the two. Then ask yourself, what did you do to 3 to get to 24? Well, I multiplied that by 8. I have to do the same thing on top. 2 times 8 gets me 16. Again, what did you do to 8 to get to 24? I multiplied by 3. I need to do the same thing to the top. 3 times 3 is 9. Now that I have that, I can go ahead and subtract the numerators and keep the denominator. So 16 minus 9 is 7. Keeping the denominator is 24. Now ask yourself again, can you simplify this? In this case, the answer would be no, so simplify if possible is not necessary. We're going to look at another way that you could add these with fraction pieces. We do have the pieces in class if you need to use them so we can practice with them. Here, look at number 1 in your book. It says 1/4 plus 2/3. Well, I'm going to go on back to the fraction pieces and say, okay, I have 1/4 and 2/3, and I'm going to lay them over starting at the bottom and see what exactly does 1/4 and 2/3 line exactly up with. Well, if I look here, looking up and down, and if I need to, I can put a line in here to kind of help me see where I'm at. I can see that it is exactly at 11/12. So I can say that 1/4 plus 2/3 equals 11/12 by using my strips. Let's look at one more example that I have. Let's look down at number 4. 1/2 plus what gives me 11/12? Well, let's go back to my strips. Let's move the ones I had before out of the way so that I can sure to get some new ones in here. And let's see. I have 1/2 is what it tells me. What do I have to add to 1/2 to get to 11/12? Well, we already have our line drawn there for 11/12. So I'm going to bring down these other ones. And look, if I add in those 5/12, because there's 5 of them there, I get 11/12. So 1/2 plus 5/12 would give me 11/12. You can go ahead and try the rest. Again, if you don't have the strips at home, you can make your own, or you can also work on these when you get back in class. But try to do a couple on your own first, just to see if you get the hang of it. As always, ask questions when you get to class, and we can discuss any problems you may be having.